It is so great to see you.
It's great to see you, Barbara. I've missed you.
I've missed you too. We're going to have to look forward to doing this in person.
Yes, yes. I know. I miss the hugs. I miss the smells and the lifting of glass and clinking it. All
Yeah.
of yeah.
So tell me what it was like out in Palm Springs. Tell us about your adventure.
Well, last year I started this adventure of going west for part of the winter, just to, relief from these brutal Minnesota winters. And last year I did a road trip for 6 weeks. This week I just flew out there. I was going to stay 6 weeks and then come home and live through the rest of the winter with everyone else. But when I got there, I noticed that there was an IMAX theater that had been defunct. Somehow it hadn't caught on about 2 miles from my house, but that a theater company had bought it up, renovated it, and opened it as a legitimate repertory theater, the Coachella Valley Rep. So I was there, and I wrote a note to the artistic director, Ron Salona, just saying, I'm a professional actor in the neighborhood. Congratulations. It's a great addition to our community, and I'd like to be on your radar, blah, blah, blah. If you ever have time for a drink or a cup of coffee or conversation. And he was very generous and made an appointment. I showed up. We started talking. He threw a script at me, made me read. He asked me to do a monologue. No one's asked me to do that in 20 years, but I'm a Boy Scout. I'm always prepared. And a week later, he offered me a role in his next play. So instead of going home, I traveled for a few weeks, and then I went back for 6 weeks and opened in this play called The City of Conversation by Anthony Giardina.
And that was just a few weeks ago.
Yes, yes. And it was a beautiful production. They're producing aspirationally, way beyond the money they have. But they've renovated this space into a really beautiful proscenium. And then this whole thing started to happen. Things started closing around us in Tech Week. We got through Tech. We got through our 4 previews. The audiences were diminishing. And we opened on a Friday. And Sunday, it was announced that we and all the other theaters were closing. So we missed our 2-week run. And it was really a lovely production. Except for myself, all the actors were imported from LA. It was an equity contract, equity house. And because he had to cancel the rest of the season, he left the setup, and he's hoping that he can bring us all back in September if things change and finish out that 2-week run.
Oh, okay. So you might be going back for that.
Yeah. I mean, everything is in flux, of course, but
right.
Better than most the damage canceling a season can have on one's reputation, one's budget.
Right. But
yeah.
We just have to go with the flow and see how things transpire.
You got to be safe, and smart people just aren't showing up to group activities.
Right. Let's step back a little bit. Tell us about your background as an actor and a new director.
Yes. I started in New York. I was a punk kid. I grew up in the low middle class projects in Brooklyn. A conglomerate of about 5 blocks of these 6-story buildings. They were open to veterans. My father served in the Philippines during the war. And I grew up on the streets. It wasn't tough. It was a real mosaic of people, but I had 3 older brothers to protect me from my more delicate leanings. And I eventually went to community college, more to avoid the draft. The Vietnam War was at its height at the time. And I was interested in reading in English and ideas, and my English professor asked me to join the debating team, which I did. And then one day she came to me, approached me, she said, I'm doing the costumes for the spring musical. They were doing OK, a 1920s musical. Could you help backstage us changing the actors into their tuxedos for the finale kind of thing? And I did. And I had never seen anything so glorious and exciting. I'd watch the show every night from the wings. And so the next year I auditioned.
And what was that?
Well, they were doing, of all things, stories of Shalom Aleichem, stage reading.
Oh,
Yeah, so I had an in, and they hired me, and I stayed another year, and this next spring musical came up, Pajama Game, and I know what
well,
got
I'm
it.
just going to stop you for a second and
Yeah,
say your roots are in Jewish theater,
of course.
going back to that first
Yes,
production you auditioned for.
that's right. And along the way, next year is going to be my 50th year as a professional actor.
Wow.
Yeah. And along the way, I've had enormous mentors and incredible experiences, but I can trace my Jewish roots and my growth as a Jewish man in the work I've done along the way with great Jewish writers, Larry Kramer and Tony. Angels in America.
Tony Kushner.
Hello. I did a play with him. Names are escaping me, but playing Shylock and playing the work I've done with you. I've always thought of myself somewhat as a fallen Jew, and I've corrected that and looked at it and grown through the work I've done in Jewish theater, among other things. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite role or a couple of favorite roles from the past?
Well, playing Shylock always comes to me.
Did you do that at the Guthrie?
I did. Joe Dowling. It was the first Shakespeare I did at the New Guthrie, and it was the first Shakespeare at the New Guthrie. It was the second season of the new building. It was an extraordinary production, and being a Jewish man in that role gives it a layer of truth that is missing when a non-Jew plays it. Think about Shakespeare, it's like the Scottish play. If you do it right, there is a sort of a magic that happens, something that is opened up that's ethereal and beyond the written word. And I think a Jewish man in that role, at the center of that play, there's that beautiful speech. In the middle of that speech, he says those 4 words, "I am a Jew." And if you can say that simply and without any artifice, something happens to the collective in that room that opens up that play in a very special way. And it did every night, and I learned through that. Certainly, working with Tony Kushner, I played Sender I can't think of the name of it. It's not the Golem. It's not the Bacchae.
I'm sorry, I don't know the body of his work. I mean, the one I know is Angels in America.
Yeah, so this was his next play after that, and it was a wholly Jewish play. I'll think of it, and I'll get back to you. But Larry Kramer, The Normal Heart. I played the Jewish character in that role, a man who is Jewish and gay and gives up his sanity for the cause. So for me, that play, of course, was about the epidemic, which is what we're going through now in another way. But it was also about Larry Kramer's identity as a Jewish man in a strange world.
Yeah.
The 2 Jewish characters. Yeah.
Well, I know that you have only done a few things at the Minnesota Jewish Theater Company, but is there something that stands out to you about one of the characters or one of the pieces you've worked on?
Well, I mean, they were all, it's always like asking someone who's your favorite child. You have a favorite child, but you don't dare name it. The first play I did was We Are the Levinsons. I just spoke to Wendy Count yesterday, who wrote it, talking about another project. But like Nancy Marvey and I met doing that play, and now she's 4 years later, one of my dearest, closest confidants. So not only was the play beautiful and our relationship on stage was stunning, but I got to take it home. So for that reason, it's very special to me. But then we did Via Dolorosa, I mean, I can't believe that I let you talk me into that. Yeah, David Hare's plays, 20 some odd characters, an avalanche of words and ideas. You had to learn it in 2 weeks.
And I got so lucky because I had you doing the role and I had Ray Burke directing.
Ray Burke, yes, I couldn't have done it without him. His guidance, his quiet and supportive guidance. But it was such a hard thing to do, and it came off so well. It was so meaningful to so many people, at least of all myself, that when it was done, the sense of accomplishment was immense. I really grew as an actor and a person doing that.
That's so great.
Yeah. And I've always said I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. My career is not built on an Ivy League college. It's built on, yes, a certain level of talent, but also people who have mentored me and seen something in me. And I've always wanted to direct, and you have been a mentor of mine, and you gave me that opportunity to direct at a time where I was ready to do that. I'd wanted to do it for a long time, but I waited until I really was profoundly ready.
Well, I was so happy that you embraced Shul.
Yeah.
To direct that play. It was a big production.
It was, and it was not an easy play.
No.
It had a lot of ideas and a lot of logistics, and it was a large cast, 8 characters, and the 9th character being the set. We had to have a certain level of design. And I was just flying by the seat of my pants, with the confidence that I have some knowledge as an actor, and that if I allow every actor, if we choose the right actors and we allow them each to have their process, and I protect that process, then we'll get to where we're going. And I knew we would, because as an actor, I know that you always get there when you're young. And it was grand. It was a great success for us, for me, for you, for the theater, for all the actors.
The playwright.
Yeah, the playwright, of course. And again, I'm working on a piece right now with Sheldon Wolf. He's going to help us write, if the Fringe come back this season, he's going to write.
For the piece, for the Fringe that you're hoping to do.
Yes, he's collaborating. And that's where I met Avi Aharoni. And I got to return the favor and put Ray Burke in the play. And, it was grand. And it gave me an enormous confidence to do it again when you asked. And then we did Oh My God last year. And that was a whole other layer of level of success, because it was a different kind of play, but it was equally dense in its ideas and its language. And the casting was not easy to do. We worked very hard.
Right.
And in the end, I think we did a good job with.
Yeah, I was so touched by that production.
Yeah, this was I. Yeah.
Which reminds me, I am not much of a social media person, but just yesterday, something on your Twitter feed was brought to my attention.
Yes.
You said something to the effect of how proud you were of the Minnesota Jewish Theater Company, if I have that.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's generally true, and that's specifically true for that production. I mean, you have a track record, 25 years. You have, I don't want to embarrass you, but you have your leadership. And you not only know how to put a season together and don't get too ruffled by the variables, but you have an amazing taste in literature. You bring plays that are not only very theatrical, but have very large ideas, and that satisfy very clearly your mission, which is to explore the differences through people and find a resolution where people can live together. So being part of that as an actor in the Midwest, a Jewish man, it's very meaningful to me.
Thank you so much for all the nice things you say about the theater and about me, really.
Well, yes, I don't know your level of embarrassment, but it needs to be said, particularly in these times, because every theater is going to face some real stiff challenges.
Yes.
getting through, part of it, of getting through it is one's track record.
What could you anticipate, if it's possible at all,
Yeah.
about how this pandemic may affect theater? What do you think about that?
Well, firstly, you look at what you know to be true. What we know to be true is every theater has closed its doors, which means that it's not producing art, it's not bringing in revenue. And when the time comes, assuming the time comes, and we all have to be hopeful that the time will come when the doors reopen, everyone's going to be in the hole, and everyone's going to need a lot of help from government handouts, donors, and of course the theater-going public. We have to get them to believe that it's safe and important to gather in numbers again. So some theaters, like this theater I was talking about in Palm Springs, I mean, they have some money, but all that money was for capital improvements, to take an IMAX theater and turn it into a legitimate theater, which they did, but they don't have a cushion because their initial season was interrupted. So they're going to have to depend on people donating more money and then attending again. There are other people, I mean, the Guthrie, what are they, tens of millions of dollars annually they spend. Where will they get that money, you know? Then there are theaters like ours, where one of the most inspirational books when I was a young actor was Peter Brook. I think it's called The Empty Space. Do you know that book?
Mm-mm.
He talks about, in its day it was controversial, but now it's like a very important handbook for theater. Talks about like
Then I should know about it.
Yeah, and it's about that thick. It's easy to read, but it's got some big ideas. But the thing I always remember about that book is he said something like, if a person walks across an empty space and there is someone watching him or her do it, then theater is engaged. It's that simple. So we may have to pull back as a community on what we spend, but we won't be pulling back on ideas.
Right.
And out of this experience, these glorious and important stories are going to emerge, and people will start telling them, and people gather to hear those stories because they've lived through it. And one of the purposes of theaters is to see yourself reflected on stage and in communion with other people, come to some sort of resolution or understanding what you've gone through.
Well, one of the things that I've always believed is that theater begins with the words. It's all about the words and the text and how it's brought to life. Mm-hmm. And you know as well as anyone else that our space has a lot of challenges and constraints, and we don't have the same aesthetic elements that a wealthier theater would have. And yet we can produce work that our audiences tell us is very engaging.
That's right.
So we may have to strip down and find other ways of creating theater and creating theater community.
That's right. That's right. Something will be born out of this that we can't even anticipate. But a theater like the Jewish theater, in some ways, it's always been aspirational. You know, it's the auditorium, the theater itself, is pretending to be a theater. We convince a lot of people that it is, but it thrives on its reputation, and the literature it presents. So we have a way of attracting very, very talented artists who work at the top of their game.
And the audiences create that special synergy that,
yes,
is what makes theater what it is.
Yeah, it's a smart audience, and they're hungry for ideas and theatricality.
Yeah.
And you could do that on a bare stage with no costumes, not naked, but just simple costumes. Or you could do that in a very grand way.
Right, right.
but the important thing are the ideas and the storytelling.
Well, it will be great to get back to doing that as soon as we are able and it's safe.
Yes, yes. It's, I'm starting to talk to a lot of my fellow artists. I'm losing a few too, but that's another subject. And everybody's struggling now that we're sort of hunkered down and we're accepting we're in this for the long haul. We're all questioning, how do we connect with each other, and how do we continue the artistic process, and how do we get ready for the emergence out of this?
Right, right. Well, we will.
Yeah.
When the time is right, we will.
We will, and that's what we do. That is actually
Right.
our DNA. Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking this afternoon, and I will talk to you very soon.
I long to be able to pinch your cheek.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you, Barbara.
You too. Bye-bye.